Hello and welcome to another Standard Games video on the official MTG Arena channel. Today we're taking a look at a Naya Legends deck featuring a Rocco Street Chef as one of the more recent additions. A 3-mana 2/4 legendary elf druid, saying at the beginning of your end step, each player exiles the top card of their library, and then until your next end step, each player may play the card exiled this way, so it is symmetrical. The opponent also potentially gains card advantage from Rocco, but whenever any player plays a land from exile or casts a spell from exile, we get to put a +1 counter on a creature and create a food token. So if the opponent cashes in their exiled card, then we at least get an extra +1 counter and a food token. So Rocco is symmetrical in a way, but at the same time we still get additional +1 counters, food tokens, and sometimes the opponent won't be able to leverage the card they exile, whereas we can usually just add an extra creature to the board or play a land for the turn. And then another recent addition is Animist Might. That's another reason to play a green legendary deck in Standard. This 3-mana sorcery gets a 2-mana discount if it targets a legendary creature we control, and then a target creature we control deals damage equal to twice its power to target creature or planeswalker we don't control. So this can be an incredibly effective and efficient removal spell for just a single green. And then another recent addition is Sigarda, Font of Blessings, also from March of the Machine, The Aftermath, a 4-mana 4/4 legendary angel with flying, saying other permanents we control have hexproof, and we may look at the top card of our library at any time and cast angel spells and human spells from the top of our library. And if we take a look at our creature breakdown here, we've got 25 humans in the deck and of course a couple angels, since we have 2 copies of Sigarda. So this can also provide additional card advantage off the top of the deck, while being a nice threat that protects the rest of our team. And speaking of protection, we've got a lot of redundant ways of protecting our key creatures like Rocco and Sigarda, starting at 1 mana with Skrelv, the Defector Might, a 1/1 legendary that can potentially tap, paying a white mana or 2 life, choose a color, and then another creature we control gains Toxic 1 and hexproof from that color until end of turn. So it's a little bit different from protection, but we also get the ability that it cannot be blocked by creatures of that color this turn. So that can also potentially be useful to break a board stall and let our creature attack past opposing creatures that only have 1 color. And then at 2 mana, we continue protecting our team with Thalia by taxing non-creature spells by 1, and the only non-creature spell in our deck is Animist Might, which we'll still be able to play for 2 mana with a Thalia out, assuming we target a legendary creature. Then we also have 3 copies of the Loyal Bodyguard, a 3/3 that we can sacrifice at any point, and then legendary creatures we control get 1 additional power and indestructible until end of turn. So this could potentially save our entire team of legendaries from an opposing board wipe like Depopulate. Not quite as effective against something that exiles, like Sunfall or Farewell. And then we also have 2 copies of Melira, the Living Cure, which can also be sacrificed to potentially bring back one of our creatures that died, and it can also help against opposing poison decks. Then we also have 3 copies of Catilda, which is another payoff for playing lots of humans in our deck alongside Sigarda. So this lets our humans tap for mana that we can spend on casting other spells, or potentially using Catilda's ability to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. And then we continue at 3 mana with Brutal Cathar as another key removal spell alongside Animist Might. This can come down and exile an opposing creature and potentially switch into its Moonrage Brute form as it switches between day and night, and if it ever switches back we get to exile more stuff. And then we also have 3 copies of Adlin, a Resplendent Cathar. This is one of our fastest win conditions, as it will keep getting bigger the more creatures are on the battlefield, and if we can successfully attack, we also get to make a 1/1 human token that can potentially add on to Adlin's power. And then our final legendary creature is Halana and Elena, the Partners, a 2/3 with First Strike and Reach that can put additional +1 counters on a creature we control, where X is Halana and Elena's power, and that creature also gains haste until end of turn. So the Partners can also benefit from additional +1 counters from Rocco, as they now get to put even more counters on our other creatures, and can also synergize quite well with Catilda, for instance. And then our final creature is Hopeful Initiate, another one of the few non-legendary creatures alongside Brutal Cathar, but it is another way to get on the board quickly as a 1/2 human, and it has training, so it can also pick up additional +1/+1 counters and potentially answer opposing artifacts and enchantments if we can remove enough of those counters. And then our mana base relies pretty heavily on Plaza of Heroes to fix our colors, can also potentially save a creature by giving it indestructible and hexproof until end of turn. Then we've got a ton of fast lands and pain lands to make sure our early land drops come into play untapped, so Razorverge Thickets and Copperline Gorge, the fast lands, and then the pain lands being a Battlefield Forge. We've got a Carplusen Forest and 2 copies of Brushland, and then a couple Innistrad duels as well with Overgrown Farmland, Sundown Pass, and a Rockfall Vale. And then the channel lands also get a big boost from controlling legendaries, as they get a 1 mana discount for each one, so Eiganjo can be a very effective removal spell for just a single white, so that's why I'm playing 2 copies despite it being a legendary. And then a Crucible can make 2 1/1s, and Boseiju can blow up opposing artifacts or enchantments, and then the 1 basic plains in case we need to search up a basic. So that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the draw with a fine hand. Turn 1 Initiate, turn 2 maybe Thalia. If we don't draw 3rd land, I could be convinced to play Catilda instead, so we can be more likely to play Adeline on curve. Opponent on what could be the mono blue deck. So turn 2 Thalia is quite effective in the matchup, although resolving it is going to be tricky in the face of their many counter spells. So we probably bait with Catilda. This is the turn they would keep up their counterspell. It's going to be a consider instead. Alright, still happy to get Catilda on the battlefield. Double Eiganjo could be a little awkward, although it is also an answer to an opposing Haughty Djinn, which has 4 toughness. Their opponent with double consider, filling the graveyard. And we get to untap, finding a land. Okay, so we can double spell here. Can go with Thalia plus either Adeline or Rocco. Probably start with Thalia, since that's pretty likely getting countered if they have the choice. And then I could see Rocco being better to resolve than Adeline. That's kind of a consistent card draw engine. Can still pay 2 for Make Disappear. And I want to kind of hide this extra mana source. Okay, Essence Scatter, that's fine. So now we get to resolve Rocco. Also because playing Adeline here would not let me attack and make a 1/1 right away, so it doesn't feel as impactful. And Rocco exiling counter spells is not going to be quite as effective for the opponent as it is to find creatures on our side, since we can sort of play around those conditional cards. Rocco triggers, counter on probably either Rocco himself or Catilda. Let's put counter on Rocco. Makes it easier to keep trading the Initiate. And there's a Haughty Djinn, so our opponent must have an answer for our Brutal Cathar. Otherwise this wouldn't make a ton of sense. So if I attack first, I could channel Eiganjo for just 1 mana, but our opponent likely has an instant speed protection spell. Possible they have a counter spell for Cathar, but either way, that's probably a fine starting point. And then counter on Rocco once again. Alright, opponent had the Essence Scatter. That happens. So I could attack with a Rocco. And then if they block, I can still Eiganjo. Could also attack with Initiate, make it more likely for the opponent to block. And then I can still channel for 1 mana here. So we are making it pretty obvious what we're holding, so our opponent knows what to play around in the future. But if they attack with Haughty Djinn, we still get them with Eiganjo, so... Negate is next. Don't have many targets for it, while we get to play Sigarda. So that's why Rocco kind of breaks the symmetry in this matchup. It already breaks the symmetry by giving us counters and food tokens, but this exacerbates it. So we'll see if Haughty Djinn attacks. It's going to be a Tolarian Terror to hold the fort on the ground. And Haughty Djinn attacks, so they might have a protection spell in place. It's going to be an Impulse, so they're digging. Of course, Negate doesn't work on Eiganjo. And Haughty Djinn down. That was a nice turn. So time for Sigarda. Don't even need to worry about Essence Scatter anymore. And counter on Rocco once again. Initiate on top we could play, or I could run out Adeline. As much fun as it is to play creatures off the top, I think playing Adeline is still going to be slightly better. While the shields are down on counter spells, Rocco attacks, and they can block the 1/1. Opponent falls to 8. And then we'll just play the Initiate next turn and get an extra counter. There's Hodijin, counter on probably Sigarda. Although Sigarda already trades for Hodijin, so I don't know if it's really necessary. Can put it on Adeline and then next turn put another one there so it doesn't trade for Tolarian Terror. Sigarda protecting the rest of our team as well. Double Hodijin, okay, that is pretty scary, but our opponent's at 8. And a Brutal Cathar off the top. That seems pretty effective. And a Thalia, because why not? And can tap Catilda to play the Initiates. Counter on. Let's see here. Yeah, I think our opponent has seen enough. Doesn't really matter where we put the counter. If we attack all out, our opponent's in trouble. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw. Our hand is keepable. Bodyguard can protect a Rocco, and now we even turn 1 Skrelv. So we can protect our key creatures. I think I go with turn 2 Catilda here, since we can use the extra mana. Skrelv are ready for duty. And hope to dodge a board wipe, and yeah, speak of the devil, Brotherhood's End. That's too bad. So turn 2 Bodyguard would have worked out a bit better to at least save Skrelv. I think I still kind of want to play Catilda, but yeah, given our opponent's deck, they're probably packing some more removal. So playing Catilda would be unlikely to work out. Trespasser, that's fine. So if we can get to 4 mana for Sigarda with Bodyguard in play, they kind of protect each other. So that's a nice setup. Play Catilda now to hopefully get to 4 mana soon. And Catilda does have protection from werewolves, so it can block Trespasser without dying. That's a fun fact. Doesn't come up very often. And our opponent takes out Bodyguard. Okay. There's another one, so could go for Rocco to try and hit our land drop, or could play more protection. I think I gotta go with Rocco here to get the ball rolling. Found a land. So now they're more likely to focus their attention on the Chef. And then I can still maybe double spell. Try and get Catilda out of Brotherhood's End range. And there's a Shieldred. Okay. So how do we want to sequence here? Where to put the counter? So we can play Melira and Bodyguard. And then probably just put the counter on Rocco himself, which we can then protect with 2 different cards. Although the upside of putting counter on one of the 3/3s is it dodges another potential Brotherhood's End a bit better. So maybe I'll play Melira first, then play the land to put the counter on it, and then play Bodyguard. And pass it back. The food tokens should help us keep up with a life loss from a Shieldred at least. Get to untap. Thalia's nice. So Sigarda plus Thalia is an option, starting with Thalia. Big score in response, that happens. Your opponent likely playing with the 6 mana Chandra as well, and potentially with the 7 mana sorcery to get stuff back from the graveyard. Okay, so if I play Sigarda, I can play a land, make Sigarda 5/5. That looks okay, and then we've got multiple ways to protect it. And another Thalia on top. Could have started by playing Sigarda, I suppose. but just wanted to tax the opponent before they could cast a removal spell on Sigarda. Plaza of Heroes, another way to protect a key threat. Okay, it's going to be a tally, so that happens. And our opponents seem to have hit Thalia. Okay. And then Rocco gets to trigger as well here, which is pretty interesting since, of course, we didn't exile any of these cards with Rocco, but Atali also works with it. And where do we put the counter? Maybe on Bodyguard to get that out of range from another Brotherhood's End, or could put on Thalia. I think I'll put it on the Bodyguard here. So now with double Thalia in play, it's actually taxing the opponent's deck twice, which is pretty funny. Take our draw. And land on top. Okay. Do have to watch out for Itali transforming here, that's certainly a concern. So we don't want to give the opponent infinite time. So for now, can play Adeline. And then sack a food token at the very least. Sigarda gets to attack. But it's the poison that's the main concern now, as opposed to the life loss, since we can easily keep up with our food tokens. So if they play an untapped land, they can transform Itali, and they're gonna go for it. Alright, so we gotta throw someone under the bus just to survive. Although I guess what we can do is just sacrifice Bodyguard here, so we don't take any trample damage. And we've got another Bodyguard coming up. This will make our legendaries indestructible. Itali itself also indestructible, so unless we find Brutal Cathar, we won't be able to get rid of it. But Brutal Cathar is a pretty decent answer, admittedly. So sack Bodyguard. Could add a mana first. Do we have enough mana to activate Catilda? I don't think so, so we'll just sack some food tokens here. So we don't take any poison. Get to untap. And I Ganja on top. I was hoping for a Cathar. Okay, so how about we play another Bodyguard and see if we can set up an all-out attack to do some damage. May have to just activate Catilda, that's another option. Yeah, I don't think we're making a ton of progress by sending in everyone. So counter on the flyer. And then can play Initiate and Bodyguard. And then Sigarda and Adeline certainly want to get involved. And that's maybe it. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mana left to activate Catilda, so that could be effective. Alright, so no need to pump right now, we just get 1 extra damage in, and I may need to use my mana elsewhere. Alright, there's our Animist Smite, can take care of Shieldred at the very least. Ooh, there's a Breach in the Multiverse. Yeah, I guess our opponent jumping with Thalia made it easier to cast in a way. So, let's see what happens. Opponent found Partners as probably the best creature in our graveyard, whereas they have a Chandra. So the second Bodyguard is going to be pretty important to survive. Opponent goes for Shieldred instead. So sacrifice a non-token creature or planeswalker. Probably get rid of the Hopeful Initiate then. Partners trigger on Itali. And that's now 13 trample coming across. So we need to soak up at least 4. So probably similar to last turn, use bodyguard. And this time we can also activate Catilda. I guess what I didn't notice is we have a Melira in play, which would limit us to getting 1 poison counter each turn. Yeah, I guess that would have been pretty effective. Now, of course, we still soaked up a lot of irregular damage, which isn't irrelevant, but I shouldn't be worrying about taking lethal poison damage as much. So, start with Initiates. Might on top. So that will get exiled by Rocco next turn. Of course, our opponent can also transform Shieldred here. So that's kind of bad. Play Iganjo, keep growing Sigarda. And then we could channel Crucible, or we can activate Catilda once again. Or do both, actually. It's pretty cheap to channel Crucible with all these legendaries. Opponent's at 23, so there's no way we can kill them. So send these 2. And then we'll pass it back. Can channel at instant speed. Backup Adeline coming up. Phyrexian Fleshgorger, that's a big life linker. Now Might doesn't actually fight, it just deals damage. But we'll still have to pay the ward. So 15, 15, Itali gets in there. So let's start by channeling. And then now what? If I take all the damage, I don't die to poison, but I go to 1. I also have some food tokens I can sacrifice. So next turn I could maybe sack all the food and still cast Animist Might on Fleshgorger to clear path. And then our opponent's got 3 blockers. I still don't think we have quite enough to kill them, but we're getting close. Yeah, let's just take it. Opponents probably did not notice we have a Melira protecting us. So let's activate Catilda. Sack a food token. Maybe should have sacked the food first in case of a burn spell, but that's alright. Okay, partners on top. So we're at 2 life. If I want to target Fleshgorger, I can gain 6 up to 8, and then down to 1 again when casting Might. Get rid of it, and then opponent still has 3 blockers. Block, block, block. And then 17 should go through. Sounds like a plan. And an extra counter can go on. Probably don't want to target Sigarda anymore. Let's go with Catilda. And attack all out. And then we can still sack the food token thanks to the Vigilant Adeline. Well, this was quite the game. Should have realized Melira saves us from Itali a turn or 2 sooner, but not sure if it would have changed our play all that much. The food tokens kept us alive when facing an early Shieldred. And yeah, Sigarda definitely saved the day, giving us a ton of card advantage alongside Rocco. So, sack our food. And not gonna sack Melira before damage. And there we have it. Awesome, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, And our hand seems keepable. A little bit top heavy with 2 4-drops. But at least an early Thalia can be quite effective against some more aggressive decks. Opponent's got their own Skrelv, could be a poison deck, could just be green-white aggro similar to ours. Still gonna go for Thalia. And then we could still Might for 2 mana total next turn. But ideally we find a white source for Adeline. Okay, Rot Priest does point towards a poison deck ×2. Okay, that starts adding up. Did find white mana at least, so I'll go for Adeline as opposed to Initiate plus Fight. Especially with Skrelv and double Rot Priest, the fight is not looking great. Could attack, I think we'll wait. Because next turn I can maybe play Partners and grow Thalia. We have varied colors in creatures, so at least Skrelv wouldn't be able to make their creature attack past the whole team. And now with Bodyguard, I guess we can deploy that alongside Initiate to grow Adeline some more. Our opponent wouldn't be able to cast a 1 mana instant because of Thalia, so it's just Skrelv we need to worry about. So Adeline can attack. I don't think we sent Thalia. Forest jumps. Okay. So we're starting to make some progress. Next turn Initiate likely to attack as our opponent plays a 3rd Rot Priest. So now if we cast Animist Might, our opponent would get 3 triggers. So let's just avoid that situation altogether. Partners grow Thalia. Would make it 4 power first strike. And attack all out. So they can eat a 1/1, but they don't have any other amazing blocks lined up. Triple blocking Initiate would be an option, but they would still lose a Rot Priest. So yeah, let's see if our opponent can start targeting their own creatures perhaps to enable a Rot Priest. But Thalia makes that a little bit more complicated. All-out attack just to get in some poison. Okay, so let's see here. Opponent could now have a 1 mana pump spell. So let's say we block 1 Rot Priest, and then with our opponent at 5, I guess I'm fine blocking something else too here. Timeo safekeeping, if that happens. And then we should have them on the way back. But our opponent gets a bit of poison in here at 6. So if they had a bit more mana to work with, those Rot Priests could have been a lot more deadly. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, and our hand is not exciting with a triple Initiate here instead of another 2-drop. But once we get Rocco going, we can maybe grow the Initiates to keep training. So I'll give it a shot. So we can't actually double Initiate on 2 with our current mana. Opponent on turn 1 Mountain, so it could be mono-red aggro, in which case we don't want to be taking a bunch of damage off our mana base. Turn 1 Swiss Spear, at least we can block that one. Alright, Plains lets us double spell at least. And sure, we'll hit for 1. Doubt I'm blocking a Swiss Spear next turn anyways when they can enable Prowess. Be an adversary, that one I could double block. Well, now I just double block Swiss Spear and take it out instead without losing anything. And Animist Might is looking good too. So we'll play Rocco and keep attacking. Found a Boseiju, so that's an easy way to get an extra counter and a food token. So the life gain from the chef could also be very helpful. And could just put a counter on the chef itself. make it even harder to take out with burn spells. It would need 2 right now to take it out. Swift Spear, so Rocco seems safe. If they're attacking, it implies a lightning strike, so I'll just take it. I think the food tokens will easily make up for the damage here. So lightning strike goes upstairs. And Adlin's a great draw too. So counter on initiates, can play Adlin and still play Animist Smite. Opponent falls to 5. And find another Animist Smite ready to fight. Could have potentially kept back 1 extra blocker just to play it extra safe, but at 8 life, I think we're okay. Can block Swift Spear. At this point we don't mind if Adlin dies. And they had another lightning strike. Got 6 more life with our food tokens as well. But we can just turn the team sideways. Awesome, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play with a pretty effective opening. Skrelv into Thalia, into Adlin, so we've got redundant ways of protecting a key threat. And then a removal spell to make sure we can clear a path. So it doesn't get much better. Although against soldiers, Thalia is not going to be super effective necessarily, so turn to Catilda might be slightly better. Our opponent's unlikely to play many non-creature spells that Thalia can tax. Of course, a 2-1 first strike blocks a bit better than a 1-1, but I think Catilda's can be a bit better going forward. Cathar's great, opponent likely hanging on to reinforcements to make a couple 1-1s. We can play Adlin and then attack with Catilda. For opponent flashes and reinforcements, use Skrelv, but then we're shields down on an opposing Brutal Cathar, exiling Adlin. Although then we have our own Brutal Cathar to get it back. So maybe that's okay. Because this would net us an extra token, which is quite relevant. So I'll go full control just to make sure I don't mess this up. There's reinforcements. Activates Skrelv. So had we gone with turn 2 Thalia, there would have been no need for this protection play. But now we're also not taxing our own Animist Smite. Valiant Veteran, I'm happy to take out. Opponent doesn't attack. So we've got a few ways we can go about this. Cathar exiling Veteran means they won't get value from the graveyard, which is potentially relevant. We can now also double spell. Go Bodyguard plus Brutal Cathar, which I kind of like. Because then we're protecting Adlin while removing a ton of power and toughness from the board. Opponent jumps, and we'll pass it back. Opponent's got their own Brutal Cathar, has to go after Skrelv since we can just protect our other target. And our opponent explodes. That was a quick one against soldiers. But yeah, getting to curve out very nicely with some key removal spells. Cathar and of course Animist Smite are some of the better tools against other creature decks, since they're great tempo plays. Animist Smite, a 1-mana removal spell, and then Cathar removes something while adding a threat to the board. So yeah, overall quite happy with how this Naya human creature deck turned out. Rocco seems to add another dimension to the deck, another way to provide a bit of extra card advantage, which these creature decks can sometimes lack. Now, this deck is still going to be vulnerable to opposing sweeper effects. Cards like Sunfall are going to be quite effective unless we can curve out very quickly and disrupt the opponent with Athalia, since those decks don't tend to have a ton of targets for our removal spells like Animist Might and Brutal Cathar, and then it can eventually take over with a powerful late game after removing our threats with 1 or 2 sweepers. So those matchups are still going to be tough, and I don't expect to win them very often, but against other creature decks, I like the additions of Rocco, Sigarda, and Animist Might to the archetype. So that's going to do it for today's gameplay. Want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.